3 months after their first meeting, Marcus found himself returning to Zephyria far more frequently than any trade agreement strictly required. Each visit brought new conversations with Princess Vex, and each conversation revealed layers of complexity he hadn't expected to find in anyone, let alone an alien royal. Today, she had surprised him by requesting to meet at one of the crystal gardens outside the capital, rather than in the formal palace chambers. Marcus arrived to find her sitting cross-legged on a bench made of what appeared to be living crystal, her forearms moving in intricate patterns as she tended to a small collection of plants that seemed to respond to her touch by shifting colors. "These are memory flowers," she explained without looking up as he approached. "They store emotional imprints and replay them through color and scent. This one holds the happiness of a child's first successful flight." She gestured to a small blue bloom that pulsed with warm light. Marcus sat beside her, careful not to disturb her work. "Your people can fly. Young Zephyrians can achieve limited flight until our scales fully develop," Vex said, her own scales showing hints of nostalgic purple. "It's one of the few purely joyful experiences in our early lives. Before duty and responsibility take hold, you make it sound like being a princess isn't all it's cracked up to be." Vex's laugh was like wind chimes. "Is it ever? I imagine human royalty faces similar challenges, though your species seems to have found ways to balance duty with personal happiness. Actually, most human societies abandoned hereditary monarchy centuries ago. We figured out that the person best suited to lead isn't necessarily the one born into the right family." This caused all four of Vex's hands to pause in their movements. "Your leaders are chosen by merit rather than bloodline?" "Ideally, yes. Though our democratic systems aren't perfect either. But the point is, humans believe people should have choices about their own lives, even if they're born into important families." Vex was quiet for a long moment, her scales cycling through colors Marcus was learning to interpret as deep thought. "Choice," she finally said. "What a luxury that must be." Over the following weeks, their meetings became more frequent and less formal. Vex showed Marcus hidden parts of the palace, ancient libraries filled with crystalline data storage that hummed with accumulated knowledge, and workshops where Zephyrian artisans created impossible sculptures that defied gravity and conventional physics. In return, Marcus shared stories of Earth, of human music and art, of the chaotic beauty of his species' approach to life. He brought her recordings of jazz performances and abstract paintings rendered on digital displays, watching her scales react with fascination to concepts her ordered, harmonious society had never developed. "Your music has no mathematical pattern," she observed one day as they listened to a Miles Davis recording. "How do you know when it's correct?" "That's the point," Marcus explained. "It's not about being correct. It's about expressing something that can't be expressed any other way. The imperfection is part of the beauty." "Imperfection as beauty," Vex mused. "My people would find that concept almost incomprehensible. We've spent millennia perfecting our arts, our technology, our society. And what has that perfection gotten you?" The question clearly caught her off guard. Her scales shifted through several colors before settling on a deep, thoughtful blue. "Stagnation, perhaps. We solved most of our problems so long ago that we've forgotten how to grow, how to change." It was during one of these philosophical discussions that Marcus realized he was falling for her. Not just intrigued or fascinated, but genuinely, deeply in love with this brilliant, complex being who saw the universe from such a different perspective, yet somehow understood him better than most humans ever had. The realization apparently showed on his face, because Vex's scales suddenly shifted to a rapid alternation between gold and silver. "Marcus," she said quietly, "your emotional state is quite visible to someone who knows how to read human expressions. Is that a problem?" he asked, his heart racing. "That depends entirely on whether you're prepared for the complications that such feelings would bring." "What kind of complications?" Vex set down the crystal sculpture she had been examining and turned to face him fully. "My people do not marry for love, Marcus. Royal marriages are political alliances, carefully negotiated contracts that serve the good of the realm. The idea of choosing one's own partner based on personal feelings is considered primitive. And what do you consider it?" Her scales shifted to that warm golden color he had come to associate with her genuine happiness. "I consider it the most beautiful concept I've ever encountered." Before Marcus could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Vex's brother, Prince Kethmar. whose larger frame and more elaborate scale patterns immediately marked him as senior royalty. His scales displayed the formal patterns of displeasure as he addressed his sister in rapid Zephyrian. Vex responded in the same language, her tone respectful but firm. The conversation grew heated, and Marcus caught enough to understand they were discussing him, though the specific context remained unclear. Finally, Kethamar turned to Marcus and spoke in accented but clear English. "Ambassador Chen, you will forgive my directness, but your frequent visits have not gone unnoticed by our court. There are those who question whether your interest in our planet extends beyond trade agreements." Marcus felt Vex tense beside him. "Your Highness, I can assure you that all my activities here have been conducted with complete transparency and diplomatic propriety. I do not question your conduct, Ambassador. I question your intentions. My sister is heir to one of the most ancient thrones in the galaxy. She cannot afford to be distracted by emotional entanglements with beings from species that barely understand the complexities of interstellar governance." "Kethmar," Vex said sharply, her scales now displaying what Marcus recognized as anger. "That is enough." "Is it, sister? Do you have any idea what the reaction would be if word spread that you were romantically involved with a human? Not just any human, but one from a species that has been part of the Confederation for barely 15 years. Perhaps," Marcus said quietly, "I should leave you to discuss this privately." "No," Vex said firmly. "Kethmar, if you have concerns about my judgment, then speak them now in front of the person involved." The prince's scales cycled through several colors before he spoke again. "Very well. Marcus Chen, human though you may be, I find you to be intelligent, honorable, and genuinely caring toward my sister, but personal qualities are irrelevant in matters of state. Should you continue down this path, you will face opposition not just from our court, but from every major power in the galaxy. Humans marrying into alien royalty is unprecedented. It would be seen as either a desperate political maneuver or a dangerous precedent that threatens the established order." "And if it's neither?" Marcus asked. "If it's simply two people who care about each other wanting to build a life together?" Kethmar's scales shifted to what Marcus now recognized as surprise. "You are either very naive, Ambassador, or very brave. In galactic politics, the two are often indistinguishable." After the prince departed, Marcus and Vex sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of the conversation settling between them. "He's not wrong," Vex finally said. "The challenges would be enormous. Is that a reason not to try?" She looked at him with those large, multifaceted eyes that seemed to hold infinite depth. "That depends. Are you asking hypothetically, or are you asking me to choose between duty and happiness?" Marcus took a deep breath, knowing that his next words would change everything between them. "I'm asking if you believe that sometimes the most important changes start with one person being brave enough to choose differently." Vex's scales shifted through every color. He had seen in several he hadn't, finally settling on a brilliant gold that seemed to emanate light from within. "Yes," she said simply, "I believe that completely." The proposal itself happened in the most unlikely of places, the emergency medical bay of Marcus's diplomatic transport ship. They had been returning from a routine trade negotiation on a neighboring world when their convoy was attacked by Void Runners, the space pirates who had been plaguing the outer systems for months. During the firefight, Vex had been injured protecting a group of younger diplomats when debris from an exploding escort ship tore through their vessel's hull. As Marcus held pressure on the wound that leaked luminescent blue fluid across her silver scales, he found himself saying words he hadn't planned. "When we get through this, when you're safe, I want to ask you something important." Vex's scales were cycling weakly between colors, her natural luminescence dimmed by injury and pain. "Ask me now," she whispered, "in case we don't get the chance later." "Marry me," Marcus said, his hand still pressed against her wound as their ship's emergency systems wailed around them. "I know it's impossible, I know it will cause problems for both our species, but marry me anyway." Her scales managed one brief flash of brilliant gold before settling back to pale silver. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, despite everything. Yes." The rescue ships arrived 20 minutes later, and within hours the news of Princess Vex High's injury was spreading across the galactic networks. What took longer to leak, but inevitably did, was the report from a junior medical officer who had overheard their conversation during treatment. The reaction was swift and explosive. Marcus sat in the Earth embassies, Secure conference room 3 days later, facing a panel of his own government officials whose expressions ranged from horrified to furious. Ambassador Elena Vasquez, his direct superior, looked like she hadn't slept since the news broke. Explain to me, Marcus, how you managed to propose marriage to alien royalty without consulting your government, your diplomatic corps, or apparently your own common sense. With respect, ma'am, my personal relationships aren't subject to government approval. They are when your personal relationships threaten to destabilize interspecies relations across 3 star systems. The outburst came from Director James Harrison of the Department of Interstellar Affairs, who had flown in specifically for this meeting. Do you have any idea what you've done? Marcus remained calm, though his hands were clenched beneath the table. I've fallen in love with an extraordinary person who happens to be from a different species. Last I checked, that wasn't a diplomatic crime. It is when that person is the heir to the Zephyrian throne, Harrison snapped. We're receiving formal protests from 6 different species councils. The Altrurian hegemony is claiming this is a human plot to gain political influence through marriage. The Crystalline Assembly is threatening to review all trade agreements with Earth until this situation is resolved. And what situation would that be, exactly? Marcus asked. 2 adults choosing to spend their lives together? Ambassador Vasquez leaned forward. Marcus, I understand that your feelings are genuine, but you have to consider the bigger picture. Earth's position in the Galactic Confederation is still fragile. We've been members for 15 years, but there are plenty of species who still see us as upstart newcomers who don't understand proper protocol. This relationship plays directly into their prejudices. So I should sacrifice my happiness and hers to make a bunch of xenophobic politicians more comfortable? You should consider whether your personal happiness is worth potentially isolating humanity from our galactic neighbors, Harrison said coldly. Conversation was interrupted by Marcus's personal communicator chiming with an urgent message. The sender was Princess Vexi herself, and the message was brief. Council chambers, 1 hour. They're trying to force my abdication. I need you here. Marcus stood, straightening his uniform. I have somewhere I need to be. Sit down, Ambassador, Harrison ordered. You're not going anywhere until we resolve this situation. Actually, I am. Because unlike some people in this room, I understand that sometimes standing up for what's right is more important than what's politically convenient. He left before they could respond. The Zephyrian Council chambers were in chaos when Marcus arrived. The ancient crystalline amphitheater, normally a place of serene deliberation, buzzed with agitated voices speaking in dozens of languages as representatives from various species argued among themselves. At the center of it all sat Vex, her scales displaying the formal patterns of royal composure despite the obvious stress in her posture. Marcus was stopped at the entrance by Zephyrian guards, but Vex's voice cut across the chamber. Let him enter. If this council is discussing my future, then the person I intend to share that future with has a right to be present. The murmur of conversations died as Marcus walked to the center of the chamber.
He had never been in a room with so many powerful beings,
each representing civilizations with thousands of years of history and technological advancement that made Earth look primitive by comparison. High Counselor Zarthek, an ancient Zephyrian whose scales had long since turned the deep blue of extreme age, spoke first. Princess Vexi, this council has reviewed the reports of your involvement with the human ambassador. We find that such an alliance would be detrimental to the stability of our realm and potentially damaging to the careful balance of power within the Confederation. On what grounds? Vex asked, her voice steady despite the scales that betrayed her emotional turmoil. Humans are an unpredictable species, came a voice from the Altrurian delegation, the speaker's tentacles writhing with agitation. They have no understanding of the delicate protocols that govern interspecies relations. Allowing one of them to marry into Zephyrian royalty sets a dangerous precedent. What precedent would that be? Marcus asked, surprising himself with his own boldness. That love might be more important than political convenience? A ripple of shock went through the chamber. Several delegates began speaking at once, their universal translators creating a cacophony of outraged voices. The human speaks out of turn, declared a representative from the Crystalline Assembly, their silicon-based form glowing with indignation. This only proves the point about their lack of diplomatic understanding. Actually, said a new voice from the back of the chamber. It proved something else entirely. All eyes turned to see an elderly wisdom keeper from the Eternal Archives, one of the galaxy's oldest and most respected institutions. She moved slowly down the steps, her ancient form supported by technology that kept her species alive for millennia. "Honored Keeper," High Counselor Zarthek said respectfully, "we did not expect your presence at these proceedings. I came because I remember what this galaxy was like before we became so concerned with maintaining the status quo that we forgot how to grow," she said, her voice carrying despite its frailty. "I remember when different species coming together created new possibilities rather than new problems." She reached the center of the chamber and looked directly at Marcus and Vex. "Young ones, do you understand what you are attempting? Do you comprehend the resistance you will face not just today but for years to come?" "We do," Vex answered. "But we also understand that some things are worth fighting for. And you, human," the Wisdom Keeper turned to Marcus, "are you prepared to face a galaxy that will judge your every action, that will see political manipulation in your every gesture, that will never fully accept you as worthy of the woman you love?" Marcus thought of the conversation with his own government officials, of the formal protests and trade threats, of the long road of suspicion and hostility that stretched ahead of them. Then he looked at Vex, at the courage in her posture and the determination in her scales, and knew his answer. "Yes," he said simply. "Some things are worth any price." The Wisdom Keeper smiled, an expression that somehow transcended species barriers. Then perhaps this old galaxy might learn something new after all. The wedding took place 6 months later in the most unlikely venue imaginable. The neutral space station Harmony Point, a massive structure built jointly by multiple species to serve as a meeting place for interstellar diplomacy. The choice was deliberate and symbolic. If their union was going to represent something new in galactic politics, it needed to happen on neutral ground where all species were equal. Marcus stood at the altar wearing a modified version of his diplomatic uniform, enhanced with crystalline threads that caught and reflected light in patterns that honored Zephyrian tradition. Beside him waited Captain Sarah Mitchell, his closest friend from the Academy who would serve as his witness. On Earth, his parents watched via quantum transmission, his mother crying openly while his father tried to maintain his composure despite the pride evident in his expression. The gathering was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. In defiance of their government's official positions, representatives from dozens of species had come to witness the ceremony. Some came out of curiosity, others out of support, and a few undoubtedly to gather intelligence. But they came. The Wisdom Keeper from the Eternal Archives had agreed to officiate, her presence lending ancient authority to the unprecedented event. As guests took their seats in the station's largest conference hall, now transformed with decorations that blended human and Zephyrian aesthetics, the nervous energy was palpable. "I've attended diplomatic functions across 3 sectors," Captain Mitchell whispered to Marcus as they waited, "but I've never seen this many species in one room without someone starting a war." Marcus adjusted his collar, trying to calm his nerves. Let's hope today doesn't change that trend. The ceremony began with traditional Zephyrian harmonics, the assembled guests producing complex musical patterns through their various vocal mechanisms. The sound was hauntingly beautiful, like nothing Marcus had ever experienced. Then came the human element, a string quartet playing Bach, the mathematical precision of the music serving as a bridge between human emotion and Zephyrian appreciation for order. When Vex entered, a collective silence fell over the gathering. She wore robes that seemed to be made of liquid light, her scales reflecting the colors and patterns that told the story of her royal lineage. But more striking than her formal appearance was the expression of pure joy on her alien features, recognizable to any sentient being regardless of their species. As she walked down the aisle, Marcus saw the exact moment when many of the skeptical observers began to understand. This wasn't political theater or diplomatic maneuvering. This was genuine love between 2 individuals, who happened to come from different worlds. The Wisdom Keeper began the ceremony with words that had been carefully crafted to honor both human and Zephyrian traditions, while acknowledging the unprecedented nature of the event. "We gathered today not just to witness the union of 2 beings, but to mark a moment when the galaxy chooses growth over stagnation, hope over fear, and love over political convenience. The traditional vows were exchanged in both languages, with Marcus struggling through the harmonic complexities of Zephyrian, while Vex spoke her English vows with perfect clarity. But it was the personal promises they had written that brought several guests to tears. "Marcus," Vex said, her scales glowing with soft gold light, "you taught me that perfection is not the absence of flaws, but the presence of something beautiful enough to make the flaws irrelevant. You showed me that chaos and order can create harmony instead of conflict. I promise to face whatever challenges come with the same courage you've shown me, and to never let fear of what others might think prevent us from building something wonderful together." Marcus's voice was steady, despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Vex, you've shown me that intelligence without compassion is meaningless, that tradition without growth is just another word for death, and that love can exist between any two beings willing to see beyond the surface to the person underneath. I promise to stand with you not just as your husband, but as your partner in changing what needs to be changed and protecting what needs to be protected." The ring exchange required some adaptation. Human wedding bands wouldn't fit Vex's clawed fingers, so they had commissioned matching crystalline devices that bonded with their respective biologies. When activated, Marcus's ring would glow in response to Vex's emotional state, while hers would shift colors to reflect his mood. It was a perfect blend of human symbolism and Zephyrian technology. As the Wisdom Keeper pronounced them married, something unexpected happened. The assembled guests, representing dozens of species with vastly different cultural traditions, began what could only be described as a spontaneous celebration. The Altrurians hummed deep resonant tones. The crystalline assembly delegates chimed like living bells. Even the normally reserved Etherian observers began producing the light, patterns that signified joy in their culture. By the ancient laws of harmony and the new principles of choice, the Wisdom Keeper declared, her voice carrying across the station's communication systems to billions of beings across the galaxy. "I present to you Ambassador Marcus Chen and Princess Vexhai Chen, united not just in marriage but in the hope that understanding can triumph over prejudice." The reception that followed was a diplomatic nightmare that somehow transformed into the most successful interspecies cultural exchange in recent galactic history. The catering alone required 3 different atmospheric zones and 17 different nutritional requirements, but watching a Bronthan warrior attempting to dance to jazz music, while a group of Luminari created light patterns in harmony with human laughter, was worth every logistical headache. However, not everyone was celebrating. Even as the wedding festivities continued, emergency sessions were being called in government buildings across the galaxy. The images and recordings from the ceremony were spreading through the galactic networks faster than anyone had anticipated, and public reaction was anything but uniform. On Earth, protesters gathered outside government buildings demanding Marcus's immediate recall, while others held counter-demonstrations supporting interspecies cooperation. Similar scenes played out on dozens of worlds as citizens grappled with what this marriage might mean for the future of galactic society. The formal responses from various governments were swift and predictable. The Altrurian hegemony issued a statement calling the marriage a dangerous precedent that threatens the stability of established diplomatic protocols. The Crystalline Assembly announced a formal review of all human trade agreements, while 3 smaller species councils recalled their ambassadors from Earth for consultation. But there were unexpected voices of support as well. The Democratic Worlds Coalition, representing younger species who had joined the Confederation within the last century, issued a joint statement praising the marriage as a bold step toward a more inclusive galactic community. Several academic institutions announced new programs to study interspecies relationships, while artists across multiple worlds began creating works inspired by the ceremony. Perhaps most surprisingly, public opinion polls showed significant support for the marriage among younger members of most species, even those whose governments had condemned it. It seemed that Marcus and Vex had tapped into something deeper than political expedience, a genuine desire for change among beings who had grown tired of the rigid hierarchies and ancient prejudices that governed galactic society. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Marcus and Vex found themselves alone on the observation deck, watching the stars wheel slowly past the station's massive windows. "Any regrets?" Marcus asked, noting the way her scales had settled into the deep blue he had learned to associate with thoughtful contemplation. "None. she said firmly, though I suspect the real challenges are just beginning. Marcus took her clawed hand in his, feeling the warm pulse of the crystalline wedding band against his skin. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. As if summoned by his words, Vex's personal communicator chimed with an urgent message from the Zephyrian court. The message was brief but ominous. 3 major species councils had filed formal complaints with the Galactic Confederation, demanding an investigation into whether the marriage violated interspecies cooperation protocols. Vex read the message aloud, then looked at Marcus with scales that cycled briefly through concern before settling on determined gold. It appears our honeymoon will have to be postponed. Marcus smiled, understanding that their real test was about to begin. I can't think of anyone I'd rather fight impossible odds with. Outside the observation windows, the galaxy continued its ancient dance, unaware that 2 beings from different worlds had just taken the first step toward rewriting the rules that governed them all. Constant scrutiny of galactic media and the watchful eyes of intelligence services from a dozen different species. Every diplomatic meeting, every public appearance, every statement was analyzed for signs that the marriage was either a failure or a threat to interstellar stability. Marcus and Vex had established their residence on Harmony Point itself, converting a section of the neutral station into living quarters that accommodated both their needs. The choice was strategic as much as practical. By living on neutral territory, they avoided having to choose between Earth and Zephyria while demonstrating their commitment to bridging differences rather than favoring one side. Their daily routines became a fascinating blend of human efficiency and Zephyrian precision. Marcus would wake early to review diplomatic reports over coffee, while Vex performed her traditional harmonic meditations that filled their quarters with complex musical patterns. They took meals together when possible, sharing foods that had been carefully prepared to be safe for both their biologies, and spent evenings discussing everything from quantum mechanics to ancient poetry. It was during one of these evening conversations that they stumbled upon an idea that would change everything. The Outer Rim mining dispute, Marcus said, reviewing a particularly complex file that had been frustrating negotiators for months. 6 different species claiming rights to the same asteroid belt, and every proposed solution makes at least half of them angry. Vex looked up from her own work, a complex mathematical proof that had something to do with hyperspace navigation. The Altrurians want exclusive mining rights because they discovered the asteroids first. The silicates claim the mineral compositions are culturally significant to their religious practices. The humans want shared access based on galactic cooperation principles. And the 3 smaller species are worried about being completely shut out by the major powers, Marcus added. Every negotiator who's tried to solve this has approached it as a zero-sum game where someone has to lose. What if it's not? Vex asked, her scales shifting to the bright patterns that indicated she was forming a new idea. What do you mean? What if the problem isn't how to divide the resources, but how to use them in a way that benefits everyone differently? Vex set down her work and moved to join Marcus on their shared couch, her forearms allowing her to gesture expressively while maintaining physical contact. Humans excel at adaptability and rapid innovation. Altrurians have the most advanced heavy mining technology. The silicates can process materials in ways that other species can't match. Marcus began to see where she was going. Instead of fighting over who gets what, we create a collaborative mining operation where each species contributes their strengths and shares in the benefits according to their capabilities. Exactly. And the religious significance issue for the silicates gets resolved by making them partners rather than outsiders. They can perform their sacred ceremonies while also benefiting economically. It took 3 weeks to develop their proposal into a formal diplomatic document, and another 2 weeks to get permission to present it to the negotiating committee. The reaction was initially skeptical. After all, the proposal was coming from a human Zephyrian couple, whose marriage had been condemned by several of the involved parties. But the mathematics were sound, the logistics were feasible, and most importantly, the proposal offered something every faction could accept without losing face. The breakthrough came when the silicate delegate, a crystalline being whose internal light patterns reflected deep thought, announced that their religious council had reviewed the proposal and found it not just acceptable but spiritually harmonious, the joining of different strengths to create something greater than the sum of its parts, the delegate said through their harmonic translator. is a fundamental principle of our faith. This proposal honors that principle while honoring our practical needs. Within a month, the Outer Rim Accords were signed, establishing the first major interspecies cooperative venture, based on complementary strengths rather than competitive claims. The economic benefits were immediately apparent, but the political implications were even more significant. They did what seasoned negotiators couldn't accomplish in 2 years. Ambassador Elena Vasquez told the Earth Council during a secure transmission Marcus wasn't supposed to know about but did anyway, thanks to Vex's connections in the intelligence community. And they did it by thinking like a team instead of individual representatives. The success brought new opportunities and new challenges. Other long-standing disputes were brought to Marcus and Vex for their input, and their reputation as problem solvers began to overshadow their notoriety as an unprecedented couple. But with success came increased scrutiny and more sophisticated attempts to undermine their work. The first serious attack came from an unexpected source: the Purity Movement, a cross-species organization that opposed intermingling between different biological types. They had been relatively quiet since the wedding, but the success of the Outer Rim Accords apparently triggered a more aggressive response. Mongrelization of galactic governance. Read the manifesto that was distributed across multiple networks simultaneously. The Chen marriage is not a symbol of love but a symptom of the degradation of species integrity. Pure bloodlines and pure cultures create strong societies. Mixing weakens everyone. The manifesto was followed by more concrete actions: protest demonstrations outside Harmony Point, attempts to hack into Marcus and Vex's personal communications, and a coordinated campaign to pressure businesses that worked with them to cease their contracts. "They're trying to make us pariahs," Marcus observed as they reviewed the latest intelligence reports about Purity Movement activities. "Cut us off from economic support, isolate us politically, and hope we either give up or fail publicly. Then we don't give them the satisfaction," Vex replied, her scales displaying the steely determination he had learned to associate with her most stubborn moods. "We succeed so obviously and so publicly that their arguments become irrelevant." Their next case presented the perfect opportunity. The colony ship crisis had been developing for months as the Generation Ship Aspiration, carrying 50,000 colonists from a failed world, found itself stranded between star systems with failing life support and dwindling resources. Every attempt to find them a new home had failed, because no single species was willing to accept such a large population of refugees. 50,000 beings, Vex said, as they studied the colonist profiles. 30% Terran human, 20% Zephyrian, 15% Altrurian, and the rest from a dozen different species. They've been living together successfully for 3 generations, but nobody wants to give citizenship to such a mixed population, because every government is afraid that accepting them sets a precedent for massive migration. Marcus added, but they can't just be left to die in space. The solution they proposed was radical. Instead of trying to find a single world to accept the colonists, they suggested establishing a new type of settlement entirely, a mobile colony that could provide services to multiple star systems while maintaining its independence. A traveling city, Marcus explained to the emergency session of the Galactic Confederation's Refugee Committee. They already have 3 generations of experience living together in space. Instead of forcing them to adapt to someone else's world, we help them upgrade their ship and establish a permanent mobile community. Absurd, declared the Altrurian representative. Nomadic populations are unstable and difficult to govern. On the contrary, Vex responded, displaying holographic projections that showed their detailed analysis. Mobile populations are more adaptable and more self-sufficient than planet-bound ones. The aspiration colonists have skills in resource recycling, closed-system agriculture, and multi-species cooperation that most planetary populations lack. The proposal included economic incentives. The mobile colony would provide specialized services like deep space construction, emergency rescue operations, and diplomatic courier services that were difficult for planet-based populations to handle efficiently. "You're suggesting we pay them to remain homeless," said the representative from the Core Worlds Alliance. "We're suggesting we pay them to provide valuable services while living the way they choose to live," Marcus replied. "Freedom of movement and freedom of association are supposed to be fundamental rights in the Confederation." The debate was fierce and lasted for 3 days. But the mathematics were compelling and the moral argument was strong. When the vote was finally called, the Mobile Colony Initiative passed by a narrow margin, with several representatives changing their votes at the last minute after consulting with their home governments. The aspiration was refitted with advanced technology provided by multiple species, transforming it from a failing refugee ship into a state-of-the-art mobile habitat. The colonists celebrated by transmitting a galaxy-wide message of gratitude that mentioned Marcus and Vex specifically as the architects of their salvation. 2 major diplomatic breakthroughs in 6 months, Captain Mitchell observed during one of their weekly video calls. "I'm starting to think you two might actually change the galaxy." "That's the idea," Marcus replied, but his attention was caught by Vex's expression. Her scales were displayed, and Vex were hosting the first interspecies cooperation summit on Harmony Point, with delegates from 47 different species gathered to discuss expanding the collaborative model they had pioneered. The station was filled with the galaxy's most prominent leaders, making it both a symbol of progress and an irresistible target. The Purity Movement had spent months planning what they called Operation Cleansing Fire, a coordinated assault designed to destroy Harmony Point and everyone aboard it. Their manifesto, broadcast simultaneously across the galaxy as the first explosions rocked the station, made their intentions clear. "Today we cauterize the infected wound that threatens to poison galactic civilization. Let the deaths of the race traitors serve as a warning to all who would corrupt the natural order." Marcus was in the main conference hall when the first blast hit, the station's lights flickering as emergency klaxons began wailing throughout the structure. Around him, delegates from dozens of species reacted with their various forms of panic and confusion, but years of diplomatic training kept him focused on the immediate priorities. "Everyone remain calm," he called out, his voice carrying over the chaos. "This is likely a coordinated attack. We need to evacuate to emergency shelters while security assesses the situation." But even as he spoke, his mind was racing with a terrible realization. Harmony Point's emergency shelters were designed to protect against accidental failures or natural disasters, not against a sustained military assault. If the Purity Movement had planned this properly, the shelters would become death traps. He was reaching for his communicator to contact Vex when she appeared at his side, her scales blazing with the urgent patterns that indicated extreme stress. 3 simultaneous breaches in the outer hull, she reported rapidly. Boarding parties are fighting their way through sectors 7, 12, and 19. Station security is overwhelmed and the nearest military response is 3 hours away. How many attackers? Intelligence estimates at least 200, with advanced weapons and what appears to be inside knowledge of the station's layout. Marcus felt his blood chill. 200 trained militants against a space station full of diplomats and civilians. The mathematics were not encouraging. What about evacuation ships? Vex's scales darkened. The attacker's first target was the docking bay. "All civilian vessels have been destroyed or severely damaged. We're trapped here with them." Around them, the conference hall was descending into chaos as delegates began to understand the severity of their situation. Some were demanding immediate evacuation that was no longer possible. Others were calling for their home governments to send rescue forces that couldn't arrive in time, and a few were simply frozen with fear. Marcus looked at the assembled beings, representing the greatest collection of interspecies cooperation in galactic history, and realized that if they died here, their deaths would be used to justify everything the Purity Movement stood for. The collaborative approach he and Vex had pioneered would be painted as a dangerous failure that led to tragedy. "We're not going to die here," he said suddenly, loud enough for the nearest delegates to hear, "and we're not going to wait for rescue." "What are you suggesting?" asked the silicate representative, their crystalline form chiming with nervous harmonics. "I'm suggesting we stop thinking like diplomats and start thinking like humans." Several delegates turned to stare at him, confusion evident in their various expressions. Vex's scales shifted to curious gold, understanding that her husband was formulating one of his characteristically unconventional plans. "Humans are very good at improvising solutions with limited resources," Marcus continued, his mind working through possibilities at lightning speed. "Right now, we have something the attackers don't expect. The combined knowledge and capabilities of 47 different species all working together." "You want us to fight?" The question came from an Etherian observer, their translucent form flickering with what Marcus had learned to recognize as distress. "I want us to survive, and the way humans survive impossible situations is by cheating." Over the next 10 minutes, as explosions continued to rock the station and security reports grew increasingly desperate, Marcus outlined a plan that was equal parts brilliant and insane. Instead of hiding in shelters or trying to fight the attackers conventionally, they would use the unique capabilities of each species to create problems the attackers couldn't solve. The Altrurians, with their natural affinity for heavy machinery, would sabotage the station's artificial gravity systems in specific sections, creating zero-G zones that would disorient the attacking forces. The Luminari, beings of living energy, could overload lighting systems to create blinding flashes and electromagnetic interference that would disrupt the attacker's equipment. The crystalline assembly delegates could use their harmonic abilities to create subsonic frequencies that would cause structural resonance in the attacker's armor and weapons, while the Zephyrians employed their natural biotechnology to release pheromone compounds that would trigger confusion and disorientation in species that relied on chemical communication. "What about us humans?" asked Captain Mitchell, who had been attending the summit as part of Earth's security delegation. "We coordinate," Marcus said simply. "Human brains are wired for pattern recognition and adaptive problem-solving under pressure. We'll be the conductors of this very unconventional orchestra." Vex's scales were now blazing with excitement. "It's completely insane," she said. "No military commander would ever try something so chaotic and unpredictable." "Exactly," Marcus replied, "which is why it might actually work." The next hour was like nothing in recorded galactic history. Instead of cowering in shelters or waiting for rescue, the most distinguished diplomatic gathering in centuries transformed into a guerrilla warfare unit that fought with tools and tactics no military academy had ever imagined. In Sector 7, Altrurian delegates used their massive strength to physically relocate the station's gravity generators, creating pockets of altered gravitational fields that sent attacking forces tumbling helplessly through the air. When the attackers tried to compensate with magnetic anchors, Luminari energy beings channeled electrical overloads through the station's metal infrastructure, turning the anchors into liability rather than asset. Sector 12 became a maze of harmonic confusion as crystalline assembly members created sound patterns that resonated with the molecular structure of the attackers' weapons, causing them to vibrate apart at the worst possible moments. The psychological impact was devastating. Weapons that simply disintegrated in their users' hands created panic that spread faster than actual casualties. But the real masterstroke came in Sector 19, where Vex personally led a team that included delegates from 6 different species, in an assault that violated every conventional rule of warfare. Instead of trying to outgun the attackers, they focused on making the environment itself uninhabitable. Zephyrian biotechnology released airborne agents that caused temporary but intense vertigo in oxygen-breathing species. Etherian phase shifting allowed them to move through walls and appear behind enemy lines without warning. Even the normally pacifist Wisdom Keepers contributed by using their advanced sensors to track enemy movements and coordinate the chaotic defense. Marcus coordinated the entire operation from the main conference hall, which had been transformed into an improvised command center. His role was part air traffic controller, part chess master, and part therapist as he helped beings who had never worked together before coordinate efforts that required split-second timing and absolute trust. Sector 7 reports all. Attackers neutralized, came a report from an Altrurian delegate whose voice carried the satisfaction of a job well done. Sector 12 is secure, added a crystalline assembly representative. The attackers have retreated to maintenance areas, but they're cut off from their main force. But it was Vex's report that brought the biggest surprise. Sector 19 attackers are requesting surrender. Apparently, fighting an enemy that breaks all the rules of physics is more demoralizing than they anticipated. The entire operation took 93 minutes from the first explosion to the final surrender. When galactic military forces finally arrived to secure the station, they found the attackers disarmed and demoralized, their equipment destroyed or sabotaged beyond repair, and their carefully planned assault transformed into a humiliating defeat. The intelligence officer who debriefed the captured militants later reported that most of them seemed genuinely confused about what had happened to them. They trained for months to assault a space station defended by conventional security forces, he told Marcus and Vex. They had no idea how to fight an enemy that included living energy beings, gravity manipulators, and weapons that turned into musical instruments. But the most significant victory wasn't military. It was political. The footage of 47 different species working together in perfect coordination, each contributing their unique abilities to a common defense, spread across the galactic networks faster than any propaganda campaign could have countered it. The Purity movement had intended to prove that interspecies cooperation was weak and dangerous. Instead, they had provided the most dramatic demonstration possible that such cooperation could achieve things that had begun calling it. Marcus stood in the observation deck of New Harmony, the largest mobile diplomatic platform ever constructed. Through the massive transparent aluminum windows he could see the impossible. Representatives from over 200 species working together on projects that would have been inconceivable. When he first met Vex, the galaxy had changed in ways no one could have predicted. The most visible change was architectural. Throughout known space, new space stations were being built based on collaborative designs that incorporated the aesthetic and functional preferences of multiple species. Cities on dozens of worlds now featured districts that blended different cultural approaches to living space, creating environments where beings from various backgrounds could interact comfortably. But the deeper changes were social and political. The collaborative model that Marcus and Vex had pioneered was now taught in diplomatic academies as Chen Doctrine, though they both found the formal name embarrassing. What had started as two people falling in love had evolved into a fundamental shift in how galactic civilization approached problem-solving. "The quarterly reports are in," Vex announced as she joined him at the window, her scales displaying the satisfied patterns he had learned to associate with good news. "Interspecies trade disputes are down 60% from 5 years ago. Joint research projects have increased by 300%, and we've had 17 new species apply for Confederation membership this year." Alone, Marcus smiled as he watched a group of young beings from at least 8 different species working together on what appeared to be an art project in the station's central plaza. They moved with the easy familiarity of individuals who had never known a galaxy where such cooperation was unusual. "Remember when the biggest controversy was whether we should be allowed to get married?" he asked. "Now the biggest controversy is whether the Hive Collective should be allowed to join the Confederation, despite being a single consciousness with multiple bodies," Vex replied. "The marriage of 2 individuals from different species seems positively conventional by comparison." It was true. The success of the collaborative model had encouraged previously isolationist species to reconsider their positions on galactic involvement. Some of the applications for membership came from civilizations so alien that communication required entirely new forms of translation technology, but the galaxy had learned to adapt. The Purity movement still existed, but they had been marginalized by their own extremism and the obvious success of the policies they opposed. Their membership had dwindled to a few thousand beings scattered across multiple worlds, and their political influence had virtually disappeared. Most galactic citizens now viewed them as historical curiosities rather than serious threats. "Ambassador Chen," "Princess Vexhai," a young voice called from behind them, using the formal titles that protocol still required despite their preferences. They turned to see Kira Okafor, a recent graduate of the Terra Zephyrian Diplomatic Academy, approaching with a tablet full of data. Kira represented something that would have been impossible 5 years ago, a human who had grown up expecting to work with aliens as equals, who spoke 3 different harmonic languages fluently, and who had been trained from childhood in the collaborative problem-solving techniques that were now standard diplomatic practice. "The Outer Rim Mining Cooperative reports another record quarter," Kira said, unable to hide her excitement. "Productivity is up 40%, workplace injuries are down to nearly 0, and they're requesting permission to expand operations to 2 additional star systems." "Any species conflicts?" Marcus asked, though he already suspected the answer. "None reported, sir. The Silicate's religious councils have actually blessed the expansion, saying that the harmony between different species in pursuit of common goals exemplifies their core spiritual principles." Marcus exchanged a look with Vex, both of them remembering when that same dispute had seemed impossible to resolve. Now it was a model of successful cooperation that other operations tried to emulate. What about the colony ship initiative? Vex asked. 17 mobile communities are now operational, providing specialized services throughout 3 sectors, Kira reported. The aspiration just completed a successful rescue operation that saved over 30,000 beings from a failing planet in the Vega system. They're being hailed as heroes. The colony ship initiative had grown far beyond what Marcus and Vex had originally envisioned. What started as a solution for one group of refugees had become a new way of life that appealed to beings who valued freedom and adventure over planetary stability. The mobile community served as everything from emergency responders to research vessels to cultural ambassadors, carrying knowledge and cooperation between star systems. And the really exciting news, Kira continued, her professional composure giving way to youthful enthusiasm, is the Deep Space Archaeological Project. The joint expedition to the Void artifacts has made first contact with something that might be the remnants of a civilization that predates known galactic history. This was genuinely surprising news. The Void artifacts were mysterious structures found in empty space between star systems, clearly artificial but built by unknown beings using technology that no current species could understand. Previous attempts to study them had failed because no single species possessed all the knowledge necessary to unlock their secrets. Which species are participating in the expedition? Marcus asked. All of them, Kira said, her smile growing even wider. Well, all of them that have the necessary technology or expertise. The Etherians are providing phase-shifting capabilities to bypass the artifact's defensive systems. The Altrurians are handling heavy excavation work. The crystalline assembly is using harmonic analysis to map internal structures. Even the deep swimmers sent a delegation, and they almost never leave their homeworld's oceans. Marcus felt a familiar thrill of excitement. This was how the galaxy was supposed to work. Different capabilities combining to achieve goals that none could reach alone. But it was also something more than that. It was proof that the collaborative approach wasn't just effective for solving existing problems. It was opening doors to possibilities that had never existed before. There's something else, Vex said quietly, her scales shifting to colors that Marcus had learned to associate with significant personal news. Something I've been waiting for the right moment to share. She reached into a pocket of her robes and withdrew a small crystalline device that pulsed with soft rhythmic light. Marcus stared at it for a moment before understanding hit him like a physical blow. That's a life matrix detector, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Positive reading as of 3 days ago, Vex confirmed, her scales now blazing with joy and anticipation. Our child will be the first true hybrid in galactic history. Human and Zephyrian genetics combined in ways that theoretically shouldn't be possible but apparently are. Marcus reached out to touch the device, feeling the warm pulse that indicated new life growing within his wife. A child who would be both human and alien, who would grow up in a galaxy where such combinations were not just accepted but celebrated. The medical teams are fascinated, Vex continued. They say that genetic compatibility shouldn't exist, but our bond seems to have created new biological possibilities. The child will have advantages from both species, human adaptability and Zephyrian longevity, human emotional range and Zephyrian harmonic abilities. And they'll grow up in a universe where being different is an asset rather than a liability, Marcus added, thinking of all the changes they had witnessed and helped create. Kira, who had been listening with growing excitement, suddenly straightened to attention. Ambassador Princess, this is unprecedented. The first interspecies child in galactic history. The cultural and political implications are enormous. Yes, Vex said, her scales settling into the calm, determined patterns that indicated she had already thought through all the implications. They are. Our child will be living proof that the boundaries between species are more fluid than anyone imagined. They'll be a symbol of everything we've worked toward. And they'll be a person first, Marcus added firmly. Not a symbol, not a political statement, not a diplomatic tool. A person with their own choices to make about what they want to do with their life. As they stood together in the observation deck, watching the diverse communities of New Harmony go about their daily lives, Marcus reflected on how far they had all come. What had started as 2 individuals choosing love over political convenience had somehow catalyzed changes that were reshaping galactic civilization itself. The collaborative model was now so successful that younger species considered it the natural way to approach problems. Universities throughout known space offered degrees in interspecies cooperation. Art, music, and literature were increasingly created by mixed species teams that produced works of beauty and complexity that no single culture could have achieved. But perhaps most importantly, the galaxy had learned to see diversity as strength rather than threat. The fear and suspicion that had dominated interspecies relations for millennia were giving way to curiosity and cooperation. Beings were beginning to explore what they could accomplish together rather than focusing on what separated them. Do you think we,